All right. Hello, everyone. I hope my microphone is working well and you can hear me. Welcome to LCC Academy for this academic year. My name is Rebecca and I will be your admissions host for today's lecture. And let me quickly introduce myself. I work in admissions department at LCC International University with Central Asian students. And today I will be giving you a short presentation about our university, and then we'll be able to go ahead and start the lecture. Okay, right, so we can go ahead and jump in with LCC presentation. LCC International University is the only North American style university in Europe. And we are located in the country called Lithuania. It is one of the Baltic states in Europe, and you can see it right here on your screens with the map. And hopefully it gives you more clear idea about the location of the country. All right, and just to give you more information about the education model that we provide here at LCC. So as I have mentioned, we're a North American style university. So the university that you can imagine in the United States or in Canada, we probably are very similar with educational style and model. We're also liberal arts style university. And again, I guess it's connected us being with North American style. And if you do not understand what liberal arts mean, I can give you a quick I guess, information about it. So liberal arts, with basic terms, it's broad-based education. So we have obviously academic programs for bachelor's and master's levels, and students choose the program they study. However, it's built in a way, there is a core curriculum, there is within major, but also you're able to take some courses from other programs as well. So it will not be, I guess, focused only to the program of your choice. And it's not only academic focused studies, but also we try to help our students to learn, I guess, about life in general after graduation and how to be able to go on about it. We're also international, as you can see on your screen. And when we say that, we truly mean it. We have students from more than 57 countries, almost from all continents. And but we're not a big university, so this number is truly means a diverse community within student body at LCC. LCC is also a Christian university. What it means is that the university values and principles are built on Christian values and worldview as well. However, because we're international and obviously having students from more than 50 countries, they all come with various religious background, and you don't have to be Christian to study at LCC and to succeed. We're open and welcome all students. But yeah, it's just for some students, it's very important. So yeah, it's important for us to mention it as well. The diploma that you get from LCC once graduation, it's accredited in European Union, which means it's recognized worldwide. You can go back to your home country and work there, fly to North America, go to China, stay in Europe, whatever country you want to, it will be recognized. We also call ourselves relational university, and that's the part that I guess I like the most. I have studied at LCC as well, I guess as most of our staff here at LCC. So relational for me personally, at LCC, it's not only numbers, it's not only you know, a student or a listener of the lecture, but it's a name, it's a face of each student, it's each student's story, and you know, how they learn about LCC and how their life is going at the university as well. So our professors and staff as well, we put a lot of attention and efforts to get to know each and every student. Okay, let's move on. So bachelor programs that we offer, there are only 6, And you can see them on the screen. If you would like to study marketing, economics, or business in general, you would want to choose International Business Administration. And contemporary communication programs, it's about journalism and public relations mainly. English language and literature students would be able to choose between three focuses, three, I guess, parts of the program. And those would be interpreting, to become a writer, or to teach English to speakers of other languages. But it's only bachelor's level, to keep in mind. And international relations and development students, they study everything starting from politics, international relations as the name stands, and also ending with project management and how to work with non-governmental organizations as well. Psychology program at LCC offers and covers, I guess, a big range of the field, starting from family counseling, ending with clinical psychology as well. And the last but not least is theology program at LCC. All of these 6 bachelor's, 4 years of studies, all studies are in English. And if you would like to know more, you can always visit LCC website for more information. We do offer master's program, 2 MA in international management and MA in teaching English to speakers of other languages. And again, there are certain requirements for each of the program for master's. You can visit LCC website as well. Okay, so we, I guess, can already go into LCC Academy, and we are proud to present this year's LCC Academy. It's our non-degree program for high school students and young people from around the world. Through this program, you will get an authentic experience of liberal arts university lectures, discussions, and group work. It is offered online and completely free of charge. And as you can see on your screen, so it will be a series of lectures, online discussion forum that you will be able to participate in. And if you decide finally to apply for studies at LCC, it will give you some extra admissions points if you are part of the certificate program, which we will get into after the lecture. All right, so I would like to introduce the first speaker for this year's LCC Academy, Dr. Michael Cox. Michael has served as Assistant Professor of Theology Department at LCC International University since moving to Klaipėda from the United States in January 2019. He teaches the biblical literature sequence in LCC's core curriculum, as well as other theology courses. Okay, so before we jump into the lecture itself, let me quickly tell you some of the rules, I guess, during the lecture. All of the participants will be able to give comments in YouTube comments. If you want to ask a question to a lecturer, you need to use Slido. And yeah, as you can see on the screen, it's very easy. You use the QR or the number slido.com, and you'll be able to post your questions there. However, keep in mind that the questions will be answered if there is a time. We'll have to keep the time in mind as well after the presentation is done. So during the lecture, yeah, we won't be answering any of the questions, but you can keep posting them, and we'll be able to pick out some questions at the end. All right, so I invite then our today's speaker, Dr. Michael Cox, to do his lecture. And I guess now is the time to do some tech part. I will stop sharing, and Michael, I will give you, I guess, the floor. You're muted.
All right. How's that? Good. Thanks, Rebecca. I had, actually, I didn't know that this was the first one. So welcome everyone to LCC Academy. Rebecca was here whenever my wife, Terese, and I have her on the next slide, whenever we showed up in January of 2019. And she was one of our first babysitters. So we had just arrived to Lithuania and we didn't really know anyone. And someone said, Rebecca, she would watch your kids and she would be great. And she was. So she's one of the first people that our family met here. You see my family here, just a quick introduction in addition to what Rebecca has said. You can see that I have 3 boys and my wife Terese there. Terese teaches in the Prime program at LCC, so students who come and need to help their English improve before they start the BA program. Terese teaches in that department. Before coming to LCC, Terese and I served at other universities in the US that aren't unlike LCC. Actually, we're very much like LCC, and so we feel very much at home here. But we served in residence life, it is called, where we lived in the dorm with students, and we were in charge of RAs who are student staff and other staff people there. And it was just a really fun kind of life. We lived in a college dorm for 18 years of our life. So we really enjoy living and working closely with college students. I give this lecture to all of my classes. Whenever I worked in residence life and I lived in a dorm with students, I would often give this lecture or something very like it to my staff. And now in class at LCC, whenever I teach students here, I give some version of this lecture. And here's how I begin. With a simple question: why are you here? A simple question that maybe actually isn't very simple. I ask my students this question on the first and last days of classes. In my Bible classes, most of my students aren't theology majors and many of them aren't Christians, which is fine. But I want them to understand in that class, why should a comm major or a psychology major take Bible? And you guys aren't in my classes, but you are attending LCC Academy. And so I want to ask you the same question: why are you here? So I want to give you just a second to write down your answer to this question. You can type it on your computer somewhere in a word processor, Word document, or you just jot it down on a piece of paper. There's no test at the end, but I just want to give you a couple of seconds to answer the question: why are you here? And you can feel free to, if you want to share with a larger group, you can feel free to insert that into the Slido that Rebecca shared earlier. Maybe you're here to improve your English, which is great. Maybe you're here to get that extra point on your admissions score, which is really fantastic, actually. Maybe you're interested in studying at LCC. I really hope that you'll join us. It's a cool place to be. Why are you here? In my classes, there are a few common answers to this question. I'm going to go ahead and drop my headphones. First, the first answer might be to learn stuff. This answer is about learning information, about putting facts into your head, maybe facts about your field of study, the basics of the concept of the major. I would say that information is necessary. It is absolutely necessary to put facts into your brain if you are doing education. But I have a question. Is information sufficient in itself to be considered education? A second answer to this question is about skills. At university, students should learn not only about stuff that they put into their heads, but how to do stuff with their hands or with their lives. Great. You should pursue education, not just to put stuff into your brain, information, but also how to use that knowledge in the real world. But even still, are knowledge and skills sufficient for education? Is that all that there is to education? I want to propose that many universities stay in these two places, in the place of knowledge and skills. Knowing about stuff and knowing how to put knowledge to use. And while having knowledge and skills is necessary, I want to argue that it's not sufficient to answer the why question. Perhaps we can think about university education as a three-legged stool. Knowledge and skills are two of the legs, but I suggest that we need more than that. We need a third leg. something else to consider when you consider university education, and something else to consider while you are actually doing that education. So while you're looking for a university to study at, and then also while you're studying. And I suggest that this third leg is at the heart of the why question, and it's actually the heart question. This third leg has to do with the way that a person's character is shaped, the values of the place. This third leg has to do with what is cultivated inside of a person while that person studies, and at the institution at which this person studies at. This third leg prepares people to be maybe the best kind of people, not just people who know stuff or people who know how to do stuff, but people who are a certain way in the world. And it's this third leg that I want to talk with you about today. It's this third leg that makes LCC, I think, such a wonderfully strange place. It is wonderful, and it is a little bit strange that we think a lot about this third leg. So where are we going in this lecture? First, I want to talk to you about a theological concept. So don't be scared. The concept is the image of God. And then I want to talk with you about how this concept interfaces with education, and especially higher education or university education. Finally, I'll return to the big question: why are you here? So first, this theological concept, the image of God. As I said before, my academic field of study is Hebrew Bible. It's the Christian Old Testament. And there are a lot of students who study at LCC who aren't Christians, and that's really great. That's actually something that we value a lot, as Rebecca said earlier. So don't be afraid that, I'm talking in Christian theological terms, maybe terms you've never heard or thought about. That's perfectly fine. At LCC, we try to all bring something to the table, and then we listen with generosity to one another, with charity to one another, and we think about ways that we can learn more about ourselves and more about the world from other people's very different perspectives. So to answer this question, why are you here? I want to take you to an important Christian and Jewish text from the Hebrew Bible. Genesis 1, which is the first book in the Bible, makes a claim about what it means to be a human. And we'll come back to this slide later, but right now I want you to notice the highlighted part here. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, in our likeness." Jewish and Christian theologians have a long list for what is meant by God's image, and maybe you've heard of a few of these. First, there's maybe some idea of a mental or spiritual faculty, like humans have the ability to reason and other animals don't. Or humans have a personality or the ability to choose. We have this idea of self-consciousness. We're aware of ourselves in ways that other animals are not. We have a certain level of intelligence or an ability to create. There are lots of things that theologians have added to this list. Another common answer to this question of what does it mean to be in the image of God is actual physical resemblance. We actually look like God. And then there are other answers that we will explore a little bit later. But to ask this question, what is the image and likeness? I don't necessarily think that these first two answers are wrong. There are good reasons to suggest such things. But I'm not convinced that points 1 and 2 on the slide here are what Genesis 1 means whenever it says image of God. So what does this important text mean? To understand this, we need to start with what it meant to those who wrote it down and those who first heard this text read to them. The first hearers of this text lived a long time ago and in a culture very different from ours. And to understand what they would have understood by this text, we're going to have to do some work. We're going to have to climb into their culture. We're going to have to ask some different questions. And one of the best ways to do this is to consider what stories people had in their minds about what is a human and what stories were floating around in their culture that the story in Genesis 1 offers a counter narrative to. So the Hebrew Bible was written to ancient Jewish people. Their neighbors shared a common story, one that almost any priest would have known, and a whole lot of other normal people would have known this story too. The story answered an important question in a world where there were a whole lot of gods and a whole lot of statues to gods. The question is, how is a god born? And of course, in the ancient worlds, gods had physical representations of themselves in their temples. They had idols like this guy here. Now, people in the ancient world didn't think that the idol was actually the god, but they did think that the idol was a physical representation of the god. So they didn't think that this was the actual god, but they did think that this piece of stone was the god's representation. So you could go to the temple where this statue was, and you could interact with the god by interacting with the statue. It's not unlike, actually, an icon in an Orthodox or Catholic church. The word that these ancient people used to describe this statue, this image, is the word tselem. It's a Hebrew word, and you can say it to yourself now, tselem. And this word works in lots of languages across the region and around that time. So it's sometimes translated in English as idol. This word connotes something more than just a statue. It's a tselem, the physical representation of a god in a temple. In the ancient world, kings would also set up a tselem in the lands that they conquered, a physical representation of the king to show who's boss around here. Modern dictators do the same thing. This isn't, unlike a statue of a modern dictator erected in a big city. If people want to know who's the boss in this big empire, they just have to look at the statue and say, oh, it must be that guy. So if this tselem of this god or goddess is the physical representation of the god, how is this statue born? How does it get there? How does this god set the statue up so that you know that you can come and worship by it? This is the story that I want to tell you. It was common throughout the ancient Near East for thousands of years, and so many people just knew this story, as well as you know the story of, I don't know, your favorite movie. So the first step to making a tselem was to ask the god, "Do you approve, O God, that we make a tselem of you?" They would ask. And then they had ways of figuring out the god's answer to this. Usually, they would read tea leaves or do other things that I won't even mention here because they're kind of gross. And then, assuming that the answer from the god was yes, then the next step was to craft the image in a temple. So they would gather special craftsmen together, people who knew how to cut the stone, and they would gather special materials, wood and precious metals. They would gather the best clothing and the best fabrics so that they could make clothes for this statue. And they would gather precious gemstones. And then these special craftsmen would work carefully to carve the wood or the stone. And they're carving away, but it's not a tselem yet. Then they would overlay the wood or the stone with precious metals. They would actually put the metal on the outside there, but it's not a tselem just yet. They would put precious gems in the eye sockets, but it's not a tselem yet. And these gems aren't actually in the pictures that are here to the side, because of course people have stolen the gems out of the eye sockets over the years. But if you look closely, you can see holes in the eyes of some of these statues. And that's where they would put in these special gems. After that, they would put special clothes on the statue, better than anyone would be able to afford. But it's not a tselem just yet. For this statue to become a tselem, it had to be birthed by the gods. Yes, birthed. And birthing is a little bit gross and a little bit graphic, so I won't go into all of the details here, though the ancient stories would have a lot of those details. Here's the basic outline. First, the statue was transferred to a special sacred garden, and it was put there by the craftsmen who carved it and dressed it and put the gems in the eyes. and the priests would go along with them. Then they would put the statue next to a river of running water, and they would put the statue on the west side of the river, and the statue would then be facing to the east. Then the priests and the craftsmen would leave for the night. Early the next morning, they would show up before sunrise, but they would go on the other side of the river. So they're looking across the river and up at the statue that they just made. Then the sun rises behind them. You can't see my hand. The sun comes up behind them and shines behind them onto the water. And of course, the water is running past and it has small waves in it, and it reflects up on this statue's face. And the face, remember, is covered in gold, and the gems are in the eyes, and it's got beautiful clothes on. And as the sunlight shines onto the river and reflects up onto the god's face, the reflection of the water would dance on the gold-plated face. It would shine back and reflect back. The gems in the eyes, they would glitter and glimmer and shine. And then the priests would look at this god, and they would raise their hands in praise, and they would say, "Look at what the gods have birthed. Born in heaven, made on earth, here was the image of the god. Here was the statue that is now a tselem." Then the priests would approach the tselem, and they would wash out its mouth. And this is actually the name of the ancient ritual that the story comes from, because what do you do when a baby is born? The first thing you need to do is to get the water out of its mouth so that it can take its first breath, so that it can begin to breathe. And here you have it, a living, breathing representation of the invisible God, a tselem. Except for the fact that it's actually not a living thing. It's not actually breathing. But but all of this, of course, is different from the story that Genesis 1 tells. In the world of Israel's neighbors, the world where the Bible was written and first heard, the God of Israel prohibits tselem. He doesn't allow people to make them. The 10 Commandments, which you probably are familiar with, opens with, "You shall have no other gods before me." No other gods. This is the first command. And the second command says, "You should not make for yourself an image." It's not a tselem here, but a pesel is a different Hebrew word, but the idea is the same. Don't make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. But why? Why can't humans make statues like this? I suggest that the prohibition, the reason that they can't do this, to making an idol, is not all about God, and it's not even all about the gods. It's also, and maybe mostly, about us, about humans. Let's return to that first text that we looked at in Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, in our tselem, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." And then it goes on. So God created humankind in his own image, his tselem. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. There are two really significant things that we should notice at this point. First, God doesn't want humans to make an image of God, because God has already made the image of God. And it's you and it's me, and it's every human who is alive and who has ever lived and who will ever live. God doesn't want humans to make an image of God because God has already made the image of God. And it's an actual living, breathing creature, the human creature. Second, the image of God is about representing God to God's creation. Like those ancient statues set up in a conquered land to show people who's the boss around here. humans reflect God's reign to his creation, or at least we should do this. So when God tells Adam and Eve, the first two characters here in the story, to do stuff in this next verse, to fill up the earth and all these things, we'll come to it in just a second, he tells them to do this stuff so that God might reign over all of God's creation through these human creatures, through these living tselums. The image of God is about humans being kings who reign on behalf of God himself. Notice the verbs here that God uses to commission humans with their image-bearing task. He tells them to be fruitful, to multiply, to fill up, to govern, to reign over. All of these verbs make sense in light of the ancient concept of tselem, a king who sets up his tselem, his statue, in a place to show the people who's boss. A God who comes to dwell in a land, who's born here in this place with this statue and this whole ritual to show people who's the God around here. It's similar and it's different here in Genesis 1. In Genesis, this is not a God who is a tyrant or who dominates people for his own gain like an ancient king. No, this is a God who created all of the world and who really likes it a lot. Every time he makes something, he says, that's good. And at the very end, he says, that's really good. This is a God who loves what he's made and takes a lot of delight in it. And this is a God who invites the humans to love him and to love his creation on his behalf. And he invites them to do this by taking care of the creation, all of it, from people to animals to seas and land and trees and little ants, all of it. This God wants the people to take care of it. This is the God who sets up his tselem, who gives his tselem the authority and responsibility to fill up the whole creation, and who has charged his tselem with representing himself to his good creation, who has charged all of us with filling the creation with his goodness. Humans, in other words, are supposed to take care of God's good creation just like God would, in very good ways. In Genesis 1, then, bearing the image of God is not a faculty that we share with God. It's not that we have reason and we can think, or that we are creative like God, nor is it necessarily a physical feature that I look like God, my appearance is like him. It's something much bigger than any of this. It's actually a vocation. It's a way of living in the world, a way of being. Being made in the image of God is a way of being in the world that reflects the good and loving and generous God to the whole creation. And this is why it's important to think about the image of God in the context of education, because education is the business of preparing people for living in the world. We all kind of know this, that education prepares people to live in the world. That's why we go to high school or especially university. Education equips people with knowledge. It equips people with skills that put that knowledge to use. But I want to suggest that education does something else too. It gives us a reason. It cultivates in us a certain kind of character. It infuses into us values. It does this whether the educational institution intends to or not. It just happens. And now we're back to our first question. Why are you here? Why study? When I give this lecture in my classes, I always offer some kind of challenge like this, and now I will offer it to you. Why study? Don't settle for knowing stuff. Don't even settle for knowing how to put that knowledge to work for you. Instead, put knowledge in your head so that you can become someone who puts it to use for a certain reason. Study so that you can become a better tselem. Knowing the world itself, putting knowledge in your head, is a necessary step to knowing how to reflect God in the world. Learning how to put that knowledge to work is good because it is learning how to use that knowledge that we can become a better tselem. Knowing how to put knowledge to good use is a necessary step in reflecting the good God to the world. Education should equip us with both knowledge and skills, but it should also equip us with an answer to the question, why? Why study? Why do we do psychology? Why do we do communication? Why study? What is it that we are investing in when we pursue education? We're investing in values, in character. We're investing in becoming a more loving, a more generous, a more kind sort of person. We are investing in becoming a better human. This kind of education means that someone studying psychology is being prepared to take care of other people, just like God takes care of other people. It means that they come to understand mental and emotional health, and then learn the skills of caring for people who are mentally or emotionally unhealthy. It means that someone studying business doesn't just learn how a business works, and doesn't just learn the skills of a successful business practice. Rather, this person becomes the kind of person who looks beyond the bottom line. She sees her employees and her customers as people. She sees ways that her business can bring a richness to her community and can help people rather connect and have a place of belonging in that community. I know that I'm talking a lot about theology and the Bible in a very Christian kind of way of thinking. And I know that probably a lot of you don't share these perspectives, which is great. This is, as I said before, a pretty normal thing for us here at LCC. But my goal in this talk, just like my goal at LCC, isn't to make you think like a Christian and certainly not to make you become one. Rather, I think that by opening this Christian perspective to you for these few minutes, you can gain a new perspective on education. What I've tried to do in offering you this Christian way of thinking about the question, what is a human, is to open you to your own thinking about what it is to be a human, and to help you consider how a university education might help you become a better one. So I'd like to leave you with a challenge. My challenge is that as you prepare for whatever your next step may be, that you ask yourself a few important questions. First, what kind of person do you want to become? And insofar as this is related to pursuing more education, another question: what kind of values are a part of the place that you will study at? Are there 1, 2, or 3 legs at this place? And then what is this third leg all about? How will this institution shape your character and your values while you study there? I'm really grateful for your time this evening. It's been a really fun chance for me to share with you. And I wish you the best as you go from here. So I'm going to hand it back over to Rebecca and wish you all peace.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much for your time and for opening up this LCC Academy lecture series. All right, so then let's go back to our presentation Slido page. Right, so as we have mentioned before, if you would like to ask questions, you can go to slido.com, enter the number, and you'll be able to put in your questions. And then we'll be able, once we get the answers and your questions in, we'll be able to choose some and I guess ask Michael. I can read out the questions. Probably that will be the easiest for everyone. Okay, so now it's the time for you guys, participants and listeners, to type in your questions. Okay, we'll give you some time.
You think it could help to put the slide back up? I don't know.
Yeah, once again, please do not post your questions in comments on YouTube. Go to Slido or slido.com, enter this number, and you will be able to log in and type in your questions. Okay, let's see if we have anything. Okay, there are some questions. So let me read it out, I guess, Michael, and then we'll be able to see if we answer. Okay, how to explain to people that man is the creation of God and not like a monkey if they don't believe the Bible?
Oh my goodness, that's a big question. Well, sometimes, well, such a hard question that I want to answer with a very long answer, right? And I think that's part of my answer, actually, is that it doesn't happen very quickly. Such conversations don't need to happen very quickly, and they happen in the context of a relationship with someone that we know well. And even then, I would have a lot of questions first. Rather than offering answers, I would want to ask a lot of questions first. I think in terms of this specific question, what I try to offer in my own classes at LCC is less about, I'm not a scientist, so I should just say that up front. And so I don't have a whole lot of knowledge or authority to comment on, questions about evolution. What I do try to do is help people to understand the ways that the Bible talks about this, and then to offer what I think in the Bible is a really compelling vision for what a human is. And that some folks find that that's compatible with the way that they already think the world works, even if that's evolution. They may think that the Bible's vision for what a human is still very compelling to them. And some people may say, you know what, I can't do this evolution thing anymore if I'm going to believe the Bible. And that leaves them with a choice, right? They have to say either or. But in my own work, I don't often try to make people make that choice because I simply don't have the scientific knowledge to force the choice. What I do want to offer is a clear picture of what the Bible says about what a human is. So the question is a good one. It's right here in the center of the topic of the lecture that I've offered. And I'm sorry, that's kind of a non-answer, but that's in a short time, maybe the best I would offer.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for your answer. And for the question as well, Angelina. All right, Luca is asking, can you please give us your opinion about God? Please be honest.
Can you repeat the last bit of the question?
Can you give us your opinion about God? Can you please be honest?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Luca. Wow, another question that's like so big. My opinion about God. I want to say, well, I believe in him, and I believe in Jesus. So there's a sort of like basics. I want to say that God is always good, and that brings a whole lot of comfort to me. And a lot of the conversations that I have with students about my own opinion about God and their opinion about God, and sometimes those discussions are, not compatible. Sometimes they are. We do love to talk about it, though, in my classes. So I'll say that. That's very often the thing that I just kind of always hold out in front of my students. God is good, and he's always good. And if my answers to your questions about God very often come down to the fact that I just think that he's good and loving and kind. And whenever we bump into something that feels unkind to us or not good to us, then that leaves us with some work to do. But my first assumption about God is that he's always good.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I guess it's the best that we can give in short time. Thank you, Luca, for your question, and Marco as well. Okay, we can move on to our next question. Let me see. Okay, what is your point of view? Why religion is so important in our lives? From Dasha.
Thanks, Dasha. People have asked this question in a lot of ways, haven't they? Scholars have asked this question in a lot of ways. And maybe there are as many answers to this question as there are people in the world, at least people who think that religion is important. I think religion does a lot of things for people, right? It does good work for people in that it provides them with a sense of belonging to community. It provides them with a sense of understanding about the way that the world works. It provides us with answers to hard questions like what's wrong with the world and what is my place in the world to try to make it a better place. I think for me, my own take in the classes that I teach at LCC, where people come from all over the world and all over the map about whether or not they think religion is important, much less what religion they think is important. My approach is to just open a conversation. I try to say, we're here to talk about the Bible. My job is to help you understand what it says. And once we've understood it, then we can have really great conversation, fruitful conversation about what religion might be good for, or why I value, or why I disagree, or why I agree. It can, once we understand what's going on, then we can have really good conversation and about what is important in the world. And so my job in my classes is to kind of offer the voice of the Bible, and then everyone else brings their own voice, and then we have conversation together. And I do try to make that a genuine conversation and open to anyone's perspective, because we do all come with something different and something valuable and something that we can learn from one another on. And I can't tell you, even this last week, someone said something that was just like, I had never seen that before in the world and in the Bible, the text that we were reading. And I was so grateful for this student who had a really keen eye for what was going on. So anyway, I'm far away from that question. I think that religion is important to us because it gives us insight into these very important questions that all humans, walk around with. Thanks for the question, Dasha.
All right, thank you, Michael. Okay, before we move on to next question, I would like to quickly mention there are some questions about sort of majors at LCC and to know more about particular bachelor's program. Right now, let's stick to the questions about the lecture. And once we're done with Q&A session, I will give you some resources where to find or who to contact on LCC programs and etc. And also about the discussion on this lecture. Again, as we have posted in the comments on YouTube, those people that have signed up for the certificate program, you will be able to receive Google Classroom link and the discussion will happen there. Okay, all right. So next question is from Ksenia, and this is a bit long one. How would you explain the effect of sin when it comes to the image of God in man? Does it mean that some part of that image have been destroyed or lost?
Yeah, Ksenia, this is a insightful question. So a little background, if you're not familiar, then one of the next stories in the Bible. So first you get humans, and they're created in the image of God, and they're beautiful, and they're supposed to take care of God's creation for God, with God. And the next story is that humans say, nah, I don't really want to do that job. Thank you very much. So this is what Christians would call the sin, or sort of the first sin. And Ksenia's question is, how does this affect the image of God? There are a couple of really important things we should say at this point. One is that every human walking around today, and every human who's ever walked around, and every human who will ever walk around, or for that matter, this is the important part of the question, will not walk around. If someone has a disability, or for some reason they are incapacitated, those people still bear the image of God. So it is, maybe we can say it like this: every human bears the image of God, and it matters at a level of degree. Sometimes we bear that image really well, and sometimes we don't bear it so well. Sometimes we reflect God's presence to the creation in really good and beautiful and loving ways. Remember, I think God is good. And sometimes we act that way in the world. Sometimes we don't. We don't do a very good job of that. I wouldn't want to say that a person ever loses the image of God, but I just want to say that we reflect it to a different degree or another. And Ksenia, to your, as a Christian person, I want to point us to Paul, and it was actually a slide that didn't make it into my slideshow. But a little bit later in the Bible's story, St. Paul will say that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He's the person who does what humans were always supposed to be doing all along. And that for Christian people, we follow Jesus, who does exactly what people were supposed to be doing all this time: good and loving and beautiful things to the creation. So even though we have sinned and we don't often reflect that image maybe like we should strive to do that kind of thing. And for Christians, that means following Jesus and doing the kinds of things that he does.
Great. Okay, thank you. And the next question is actually follow-up to the same topic. In your opinion, what is the practical side of having God's image?
Part of it is the topic of my lecture, right? That we have God's image means that you can go to university and you can become a better one, right? Like you can know things about the world, and you can learn how to do things in the world. And that by knowing how to do stuff in the world, you can better reflect this good God to the world. So that's one implication. I think too that it really frees people to go and study anything, to go and do almost anything in the world. As long as that thing is good and loving and kind, it is a space where a person can, reflect the good God to the creation. So I'll pick on my brother. My brother, he is a manager at a store that sells paint. You might think, how is it that my brother at this paint store reflects God's image by selling paint all day, right? My brother has really wonderful relationships with the people that he works with and with the customers who come into his store. He knows them well, and he takes care of them really well, and not just with their paint, but he knows them as friends, and he knows whenever their kids are sick, and he asks them questions, and he helps them whenever they need help. My brother is somebody who is so generous and so kind and so loving, and even in his job at a paint store, he's able to find ways to be loving and generous and kind. And I think that's really beautiful. And so the practical benefits are, well, anything that you want to do, you have the opportunity to do that thing in ways that show kindness and goodness to other people or to the world, the creation, the environment. And anytime you do that kind of stuff, you are, in my lecture, I had this picture where these people are holding things up. You are like, with this shovel, like doing good things in the world. You have your doctor's kit and you are doing good things in the world. And all of those things are practical outworkings of someone on the scale of bearing God's image, like bumping up the scale a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. They can be those things. They don't necessarily have to be, I guess, but it can be. It's a good question.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so for because we have limited time, yeah, I will just pick, I guess, one last question. You guys are very active. Thank you for all of your questions. If we would have time only. Okay, so this last one is again connected to God's image. Do you think with time, people's understanding of God's image changes too? How normal is such change?
It's an interesting question. My mind goes in a couple of places. I did have that one slide where I say, this is what people think that bearing the image or having the image of God means, right? That sometimes it means for some people, they think, oh, we think, therefore we must be like God, or we're creative and God is creative. So this must be the way that we are made in God's image. My own training as a theologian and as someone who studies the Bible is that I want to do a lot of digging to figure out what the original writer thought and what the original hearers thought. What did they think whenever they heard image of God? And that's kind of the reason for me telling this weird story about how a God is born in the ancient world, because whenever they heard Tselem or image of God, they heard that God in the temple down the road. That's what they thought of. And so whenever they hear this story that God created humans in his own Tselem, that's what they heard, they would think this is a category problem because Tselems are statues, but I'm not a statue. So that this would cause them to think, what is going on here? So to answer the question, I want to try to dig in and figure out what did people think whenever they wrote this stuff down? And then from there, work forward and say, well, what are the implications? So yeah, I do think that sometimes people's perspectives on these things change. And I don't think that that's always a bad thing, but I want to try to continue to pull us back to what those people meant whenever they wrote it down and whenever they heard it, because from there we can work forward in better ways. So if we work forward and we have this idea, it's not contrary to the original one maybe, but we'll be safer and better and have better imaginations from sort of the first place. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's me trying to do history and theology all in one, right?
Okay, thank you, Michael. So that was the last question that we had for today's lecture. And I will just go ahead and share my screen again. There are just a few announcements that would be great for students to hear. Okay, let's see.
Maybe while you're finding, it's been really fun, guys. Thanks for interacting so well. It's been really great to be with you.
All right. Again, for those that would like to participate in certificate program, we have shared the sign up form, I guess in comments on YouTube. You'll be able to access that. Just to give you, I guess, more information, what is it? So active students who will take part in at least 3 lectures and contribute to online discussion and complete a final project will be awarded with a certificate of participation and an additional point to their admission score if they decide to apply for BA studies at LCC. Okay, so with the forum discussion, there are some points, I guess, important points to mention as well. Posting a personal response to the follow-up question in Google Classroom, which you will get a link once you sign up for certificate program. After each lecture that you attended, you'll have to post personal response, comment on at least 3 responses of other LCC Academy participants after each lecture that you have attended. And of course, there will be a complete, a final project, a reflection video, and again, the requirements and everything else will be announced for those that have signed up for a certificate program. Again, tomorrow morning, if you've signed up already, you will receive the link to Google Classroom for the discussion forum and instructions as well. Right, if you would like to sign up, please, right now is the time to access the link in comments on YouTube. And while you do that, let's move on to our next slide. Next week on Tuesday, we have our second lecture from Natalia Zakharova here at LCC, and she will be presenting on the topic of the future of work. And she works at LCC as an HR vice president. So you will receive again the details, the link, how to connect, what time, and etc. And meanwhile, if you will have any questions, and I saw in Slido that you had about bachelor studies admissions process, what documents to get, and if just in general about LCC, you can contact through LCC website, just email us straight, or you can scan this QR code and it will take you to an online form that will again reach admissions office. Okay, thank you everyone. It's been great to spend this time with you. And again, Michael, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure listening to your lecture, and I feel like I'm back a student again at LCC.
Good. Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you everyone. So then this is it, and I will end the stream. Michael, if you want to stay, you can stay at the Zoom, I guess.